Listen to this. This really happened to me. This isn't just a story. The other night, I got a little video from a friend of mine. It was labeled a few years old. And it was a brief video, a minute and a half, 2 minutes, of his father and his older brother playing music together. It was just kind of a simple country bluegrass jam session. It was a beautiful thing to see. Two seasoned musicians playing off each other. And also, it was great to see father and son sharing something they both valued, something they worked on together. Love of music handed on from father to son. So many things were in place. And then my friend added, honestly, why don't we talk about how much this life hurts? I wasn't expecting that, but I wasn't surprised. How would you have responded? Stay with me, I've got a story to tell. Hi, I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTeigue, your host here every day, The Catholic Current, coming to you from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Let's take a closer look. Glad you're here. Now, if you had seen that video yourself, you wouldn't have thought that there was anything wrong because you don't know the people involved, you don't know the history, but let's just say I knew enough about the story. I knew what took place on either side of the camera and either side of the frame, so that this was lovely, it was beautiful, it was fun, and it was poignant. It was sad. So when my friend texted me and says, "Honestly, why don't we talk about how much this life hurts?" I texted back right away and I said, "Well, what do you mean we?" Because I think, buddy, you and I do pretty well at vocalizing our pain and our grief. After all, very many people who know my work know that I very often refer to myself as the dark, brooding, melancholic Irishman with an apocalyptic imagination. So, what was he referring to? Who is that we that don't talk about their grief? And he says, well, them. And that got me to thinking. Now, it's true if you wander in certain places in the internet that I tend not to go, TikTok and Instagram and the like, there is a whole lot of younger women who always seem to be screaming and crying and sobbing and smashing things and being very histrionic on camera. And so those are the folks that I'm not talking about. I think it's a great way of dealing with emotions, but at least they're getting it out. Um, I don't think they're going to die of ulcers, but I'm especially thinking about men, young men and older men who don't know what to do with their grief, don't know what to do with their anger. Let me give you an illustration. There's a psychologist, Brene Brown. She's a pretty good writer. And she had written a book about women dealing with suppressed emotions and so on, became a bestseller. She was at a book signing party at a bookstore somewhere, and a woman brought four copies, one for herself and one each for her three daughters. And she ran off to give them to her daughters. And the husband stayed behind and said, "Hey, doctor, I see you took the easy way out." She said, "Well, what do you mean, sir?" She says, "Well, look, you wrote about women and dealing with their emotions. But let me tell you a story about men. Let me tell you a story about my family. I know with certainty," he said, "that my wife and my three daughters would rather see me die than fall off the white horse," letting them know that I have grief and pain and anger too. And he walked off, and she was shocked because she's got a husband and she had a baby boy at the time. There's a lot of different reasons why men don't know how to deal with their grief and their anger. I'm just going to deal with a few of them right now. I immediately thought of that poem by T.S. Eliot called The Hollow Men. It's worth reading. Just the closing lines. He writes, "This is the way that the world ends. This is the way that the world ends. This is the way that the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper." And I think the whimper of these broken-hearted men is seen in suicide, deaths of despair, fentanyl, pornography addiction, substance abuse, failure to launch, failure to thrive. And I'm sorry to say that I think that some of that hollowing out of men was not by accident. I'm not the first one to see this. C.S. Lewis wrote how many years ago in his book, The Abolition of Man? He talked about the men without chests. He says, we make men without chest and expect of them virtue and enterprise. So he said, we've got men of head and men with bellies. So, men of head, reason is a good thing. You want to have reason. I'm a professor of philosophy and theology. I love reason. But what he was predicting and warning against was this Silicon Valley approach that reason is just technique. It's just crunching and massaging the data. It's not even knowledge, much less wisdom. And then the men of the belly, as C.S. Lewis would say, are that's appetite, that's passion, and it's merely animal if it's not humanized. And what connects the heart and the gut, the passion and the ability to analyze is the heart, the chest. And we've ripped the heart out of men. We know this to be true. There's all sorts of documentation about it. I don't want to get lost down a lot of side trails. I will say this much. We've got generations of men who feel defeated, who feel ashamed, who feel unwelcomed, who feel unwanted, who believe or are at least told that their very maleness is a poison and there is something wrong with them simply by virtue of the fact that they're men. Now, this is not only monstrous and not true, it is shockingly anti God, anti human, anti Christian, anti Christ. So, what's the alternative? Well, St. Bonaventure said, if you do not know your own dignity, you will never aspire to the things of God. And we haven't taught boys and men to value their own dignity. They don't know who they are. They don't know whose they are. They don't know that they were made in love. They don't know that the fulfillment comes from adventure and risk and courage and struggle and sacrifice and honor. And they don't know that Christ the King is calling them to fight at his side to win souls and restore creation back to the kingdom of heaven. That's something worth living and dying for 1,000 times. And maybe one man out of 100,000, probably more, has ever heard anything like it. The reason he hasn't, there's all sorts of people to blame, families, absent fathers, the schools, the culture, the internet, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the churches, Christian communities. But I want to give a shout out to my brother priests. And in particular, I want to talk to my brother priests who are pastor at St. Typicals. Guys, you know who you are. You know who you are. We're a welcoming community, which means you really don't work very hard at enforcing standards because some people are going to get snippy or complain. We've meet people where they're at. True story. 99.99% of the priests who tell me that we have to meet people where they're at, as if that was a brilliant observation, because where the heck else would you meet them? 99.999% of those guys have absolutely no plan for leading people anywhere once they meet them where they're at. So you've got guys who are dragged to church by their wives or by their mothers, and they are looking for the exit literally and figuratively constantly. And guys, who can blame them? The music is banal, it's falsely feminine. It's the "Jesus is my girlfriend" playbook. "Oh, oh, Jesus, ooh, 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 what would I do without you, hoo, hoo?" How could anyone with an ounce of testosterone tolerate that? But you, Father Cheerful at St. Typicals, do. Why? Because it's easier. because it's always been that way. Because if you let that go on, Susan from the parish council won't complain. And you know how she gets, am I right? And another reason guys come to church and have nothing to really hook them to make them want to stay is because the preaching tends to be awful. You talk about your vacations, you tell a few jokes, you say something about love. Maybe you say something about environments or rainbows or something social justice-y, etc. But you're giving these men no reason to believe that you have a crucified Savior. You give these men no reason to believe that Christ called you from the dead as he called Lazarus out of the tomb. You give these men no reason to believe that you have any idea that you've ever been saved from anything, because a man who knows he's been saved, a man who knows that he's been washed white in the blood of the Lamb, will know that he must spend every waking moment proclaiming Christ and bringing everyone, and especially wounded men, to the foot of the cross, because that's where the healing begins. But if you, Father Cheerful at St. Typical's, give no indication that you've met the crucified and risen and reigning Lord, those poor, broken, masculine souls in the pews in front of you will walk away empty, and eventually they will simply walk away. Now, here's a hard question. What should we do about it? You and I, as brother priests and as family members of broken-hearted, heart-sick men who don't know how to be good men, who don't know how to be godly men, who don't know the liberation of mercy and forgiveness and worship. What shall we do with them and for them? I'm bumping up into the time limit I had planned for this message, so I'll say this much. We've got to talk to these men about their pain, their grief, their shame, and their anger. And we've got to teach them how to grieve and pray and worship and work and be healed so they can become the witnesses and warriors that everyone needs them to be. So I ask you to join me on Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern for another part in this sequence about grief and why it doesn't need to kill us all. Meanwhile, think on these things, take them to prayer, talk about it with those you love. Go in peace, and please do pray for me, for I am a sinner. Thanks for watching today. I release new videos on Mondays and Wednesdays. Check out the archives for more videos. You can listen to my podcast at stationofthecross.com, and you can find my written work at heraldofthegospel.org. See you next time.